So, on behalf of the Department of Maltese and with the support of Ms. Genwa Momari from the Department of Arabic, I would like to invite you to this presentation by Mr. Nimer from University. This is the second talk, in fact, that Saad will be giving today. Mr. Nimer teaches in the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Studies of University in occupied Palestine. He has been doing so for the past 15 years now. His areas of specialization are modern and contemporary Arab thought, which of course explains why he's going to be giving a presentation about this theme today, the Palestinian question, which he talked about, the Palestine question, which he talked about very successfully, I would say, on Monday. Arab society and Arabic studies, and he also teaches in the Arabic studies program of University, which is a program mainly for foreign students who visit Birzeit for a maximum of 3 months now. Mr. Nimer obtained a BA in Sociology and Political Science from An-Najah University in Nablus, Palestine, and an MA in Middle Eastern Politics from the University of Exeter in the UK. He is also a political activist for the freedom of Palestinian political prisoners, as you were saying on Monday, and he is active in the Right to Education campaign. I think it would be nice, because this is a small but very intense group, for everyone to introduce themselves briefly.
From the Oriental Institute, I teach modern literature and media. I'm a student of Maltese, and I'm Ingrid Goslar. I'm an interested audit student.
Reformism, Institute of Linguistics.
Albert Wojcik, Department of Maltese and Institute of Linguistics.
صباح الخير، صباح النور، أهلا وسهلا. John Portelli, originally Maltese, still Maltese, but I live in Canada where I teach at the University of Toronto. Nice to meet you.
Okay, you are all welcome. And the thing is, always there is lots of questions regarding the Arab world and Islamic world in general. Why there is no such development in these countries, and why do we live in 22 Arab countries rather than one Arab country? And the other thing is, having 22 Arab countries, we didn't succeed in even introducing one democracy in the whole period. Definitely there are reasons for these kind of things and these quite good questions. And is there, at least at some stage, by the Arab society to produce any kind of thoughts or ideologies that might help in doing that? Because people think that no, we can't see any philosophy or any kind of thoughts, but it is not right. There are lots of thoughts coming out during what we call the Renaissance period, from the mid 18th century onward till almost today. We have many thoughts. If I'm going to draw a kind of a comparison between the Renaissance period in Europe and what happened in the Arab world, in Europe at least those thoughts of the thinker at that time for Renaissance period, they found a vessel to carry them and to apply them. Now when we are talking about the same Renaissance in the Arab world, do we have this kind of vessel or not? And why we failed to carry those thoughts from that time, like what happened, for instance, in Europe? There are definitely circumstances which have prevented that. Now, to talk about from the 18th century onward, or mid-18th century onward, about the Arab thoughts, definitely we have to understand the socio-economy of the society at that time in the Arab world, which we were under the Ottoman occupation, if you like, or people don't like to call it occupation, they like to call it, the last dynasty of Islam. Well, it depends on from which perspective you are looking at it. But surely and foremost that the Ottoman period was definitely the worst in comparison to the other dynasties over the period, and especially in the last 100 years of the Ottoman, Empire at that time. That's why I'm going to start with a little bit of the Ottoman Empire, which started in 1299 till the end of the First World War and a little bit after, when Ataturk abolished the Caliphate and killing forever the last dynasty of Islamic ruling and modernizing Turkey into a secular state. Right, the Ottomans, they started, as we say, very, very early with the Ottoman, and they were not that much of a society that we can talk about, at the very beginning of these tribes who took over the area around them, and they started to grow in strength, especially once they started to use what was known as the Janissary army. The Janissary army is an army created by the Ottomans, where they would usually use the children of 7 and 8 years old. They put them in camps and they trained all their life to be in the military. So you can imagine a child of 8 years know nothing about God is my God, and the Sultan is my master, and that's it. Also,
Christians, children of
yes,
Christians.
well, not always Christian, but there was many cases of Christian. Yes, it was especially when they start the conquering the north, especially that the Ottoman Empire, for the difference from the other dynasties, that instead of going first southward, going to the Middle East, they went first up, and that gave them a huge strength. We can see that by the map when they started only in this area, small area, and they start spreading. But now you can see the spreading in accordance to the dates, that it went first up to Europe, and they reached, as a matter of fact, near Vienna, in the mountain, absolutely, overlooking Vienna. And then they start coming down to the rest of the Mediterranean area and to the Middle East, and they became, in that way, which was, I think, the biggest ever empire for the Islamic empire ever. During the Ottoman was the biggest. They were depending on this Janissary army, snatching children, as you mentioned, even from Christian families, especially in the north, making this a huge army, which was very brutal, and that's why they were spreading that much. On the other hand, that's why I'm saying that the Ottoman did not add a lot at all in comparison to other dynasties before them, especially when we are talking about the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and even to the Fatimids. There were lots of inventions and thoughts and philosophy and all these kind of things. But during the period of Ottoman, definitely it was absolutely closing down, and to the contrary, they brought us backward instead of forward. That's why it was really a big problem. One of the problems, and one of the most important problems, if we are going to talk about the socio-economy of the region, is this system of administration done by the Ottomans, which is known as the patron-client system. It is based on one important fact, that all land of the Ottoman Empire belonged to the Sultan. So there is no private property. There is no local landlords which can keep part of the money in their locality and to use it, even for their children to be educated, or for doing some projects inside, like what happened in Europe. But in the Ottoman example, all land belongs to the Sultan, and he granted the land to nobles who are going to rent it to the peasants, and by the end of the day he will take the taxes. So the money is channeled directly up, and it's not remaining in the areas. And that's why it's patron-client. The Sultan is appointing a wali over Damascus. He will be responsible for all this area. So the wali is a client, right? But at the same time, he's a patron for the ones who are under him, and so this one is also a patron and a client, and so on, patron and client, till we reach to the bottom line, which is the fallahin, or the peasants. Now the Sultan, he decided that, for instance, Damascus as a wilaya, underneath there is, like Palestine and Lebanon and Jordan and all this area. Okay, he decided that taxes per year from that wilaya should be, let's say, 100,000. Because, good wilaya, and they have good land and water resources, so 100,000 for my land to use. Now, for the wali of Damascus, if he had like 4 sunjuks, which is districts, he had them to distribute those money which he had to earn for the Sultan on these areas. But in this case he will lose, because he can't have anything for himself. So he raises it, instead of 100,000, because he wants to put a little bit in his pocket. Instead of all these should pay 25,000, they will pay something like 35 or 40. He asked him to pay 40. So the difference he will put it in his pocket. Now for this guy, if he had to pay 35 or 30, then 10 here he should collect, but he wants also to put in his pocket, and so on. So by the end of the day, the taxes, real taxes for the peasants here, in comparison to what the Sultan is asking for, became 3 times or 4 times more. And that became, really tiring on the or a big burden on the fallahin in the lowest level. Now the problem is that those fallahin at that time, there was a huge and very horrible punishments if you fail to pay the taxes. It's like you are cheating the state, or you are, doing something, or stealing from the state. So if you don't pay, you should be punished severely. One method of the punishments was what we called, and everyone knows it in the Arab world, called al-khazouk, right? Khazouk. Khazouk is a kind of a pole, wooden pole, and it's sharp edge at the top, like the pencil. Like the pencil. And they used to set people on it till it come out from their head. It's very painful and very ugly kind of death.
Impaling, you say. Impaling.
It's unbelievable, right? Which it means that, okay, for any peasant now, he had to do whatever he could to pay, otherwise he will face that. It was like, to intimidate everyone by this form of severe punishment. Now the thing is, you have to notice that in our societies, generally speaking, not like Europe, we don't have lots of money lenders. Because in Europe, they used to go to a money lender and try to pay if they were really indeed in a very bad situation. And we can remember all the famous play of Shakespeare, right? The Merchant of Venice. He's talking about the Shylock, that he was a money lender, and the peasant who borrowed from him, and for the conditions. It's a very well-known story. Why would Shakespeare talk about it? Because this phenomenon was very widely spread in Europe at that time. In our countries, because of Islam, forbid the profit, or not the profit, the interest for the money. So people, we don't have that much of money lenders, which means that these people are really in big trouble if they could not find, the money to do it. But since this system is not a centralized kind of government, in sense of that everyone is registered, so these peasants here are not registered officially by the state. So he can run away from the village by the end of the year, if he couldn't pay the taxes, and go to another village. At that time, people were less, land more. So the Mukhtar of the village, the chief of the village, definitely will welcome anyone who is coming, because he will give him a new land and he will take a little bit of money for himself, the taxes. So he would welcome anyone. He's not going to question why you came here. So it was widely spread that people would move from one area to another. It's a way to run away from the taxes. You work during the year. If the season was not that good, and by the end of the year you could not collect the amount of money that you have to pay to the government and to the Sultan, then run away. And the Ottomans were not also stupid, so they introduced a new law saying that, okay, in case of anyone run away from his village because he is not paying his taxes, his neighbor will pay for him. That was the most stupid decision, because you know now the neighbor had to pay now twice, so the neighbor also will run away. Now the third neighbor, do you think he will stay and pay for everyone? So what happened that in 1720s, right, in Palestine particularly, in an area called Safad, in Palestine, north of Palestine, 69 villages disappeared. Apparently that year was kind of, you know, really very bad year of rain and not good for the agriculture. So 69 villages disappeared totally, you can imagine, because again, as I said, there is no registration, so you go wherever you like and that's it. This system was definitely the worst system for two reasons. First of all, it's very high taxes on this burden of these people, because all these people are making money only for their own pockets. The second thing, that they don't own the land. It means that there is no accumulation of wealth in the region, and all the wealth goes in one direction, directly to the Sultan, since there is no ownership of land. Now the Sultans used to, after a while, used to change the walis so often, because some walis, when they feel that the Sultan is weak or he's involved in a war in Russia, for instance, like the Karmis war, that they could declare their independence and, you know, refuse to pay the taxes and keep everything for themselves. So in order to avoid that, the Sultan started to use appoint walis only for 1 year. 1 year, and then they will change him. 1 year and they will change him. So he can't make, you know, power, at least locally, to fight against the Ottomans or to declare independence, which meant, at the same time, if I am a wali for only 1 year, I want to grab as much money as I could in 1 year. And that makes even worse for the peasants. So for all these circumstances, why people would think that in our region, the people think that the Ottomans were an occupation or were really very bad, and for other reasons as well. We'll come into that. But for one of these reasons were this kind of administrative structure, which was really, you know, very bad and non-effective at all, even in the development of the region. To the contrary, it was reducing the ability. It means there is no schools. It means there is no, you know, lots of things that was in this region. The 1858 till 1862. There was a group of people here near the Sultan, families of, you know, very near to the Sultan, or high officers in the Janissary army who benefited from the Sultan. They developed wealth, not only the Sultan, but also these people around them. They sent their children to education, they became aware, so we can say the beginning of a bourgeois group started to grow in the Turkish area, not in the rest of the areas though, because, you know, the accumulation of wealth is up there. So a little bit of bourgeois started to emerge, and as a bourgeois, definitely they will find that laws and rules are against their ambition to build economy. So they have to go against and try to pressurize the government. So there were lots of pressures against the government to change, or the Sultan at that time, to change the rules, and one of those was to abolish this system and introduce a more modern system like Europe. It's the same time when we, for the very first time, came in touch with Europe, whether in the Arab region or the Turkish Empire as a whole, the Ottoman Empire. We came in touch with the European, and to discover that there is a huge difference in each and every level of life, whether it's political administration, whether it's administration, or even in science, whether it's in education, in social life, even in manners and ethics. Everything is different from our society, and usually your identity will be clearer usually when you compare it with others' identity. So for the very first time, Arabs discovered that, oh, there are some people different from us, and now we can start thinking, are we the good one or they are the good one, which is much better, you know, so we need to do some changes. So the Ottoman at that time, these bourgeois, emerging bourgeois, they started pressurizing the government for change. One important one was the land code, which in this case stopped the idea that all land belongs to the Sultan, and now we can distribute land freely for all peasants. So I can say that by that time, we started the feudal system. That's why lots of writers are talking about the period before that, semi-feudal. The life is feudal, definitely, but there is no ownership or local landlords. So it is semi-feudal system. But with these laws in distributing land for all peasants for free, it became, real feudal system. But not that. We started the feudal system in 1858, let me say, or around, right? When Europe had left feudalism more than 300 years earlier. And they are already in the process of being not only bourgeois and capitalism, and also turn into colonialism at the same time, so we're very late, something like 400 years late from what the European, when we started yet. So that affected us. So the land, they say it's private land for four kinds of land in the land code. Private land, which means in this case that anyone could go to Beirut, at least from Palestine, go to Beirut and register the land in his own name and take it. So as easy as that. The problem is that people were reluctant to do that. Why? Because they were afraid. They don't trust the government. If I register land in my name, then I cannot escape any longer. I'll be registered, and then they can also draft me to the army because they have my name, my record, and everything. So I prefer not to. So what happened in such case? That they talked to families who used to collect taxes, big families that was controlling the area and collect taxes for the Ottomans, to register the land in their name. And hence we started having big property registered by name of landlords, local landlords, and they started to have a huge amount of land. The example I usually use in Palestine particularly, the Barghouti family, they own 7 villages in one area. 7 villages, it's unbelievable. Where they came from, how do they inherit all that, right? It's because the people there, the peasants, they just registered their land in the name of this big family, so they can at least continue their life normally without being, caught by the government in a way or another, to be drafted to the army or to pay taxes, and they are a little bit, they felt that they are a little bit free. The second kind is the state land, which remained in uncultivated areas, deserts, woods, roads. This continue to be the state land. The third one is the common land, which later created a problem for us, that they gave a space of land around the villages. It belongs to the whole village for the natural increase, the growth of the village. But this land is by the state allocated around each village. It belongs to the village. Later on, when people start using it, problems start. Why you use this part, not that part? This part I'm much nicer than that part. So they started to now, also calculate the number of land, the land area, and the population, and distribute land evenly for all the families. If you want to buy a piece of land like that in Palestine today, you would need something like 700 to 800 signatures from all these inheritance, over the period. That's why sometimes we lose land because of that kind of system. Right. The fourth one is the Waqf land. Waqf land, and it's very famous in the whole Arab world, not only in our region. It's an Islamic concept that this land belongs to God. Belongs to God. You can't sell it, you can't buy it, you can do whatever with it. You can use it though. Why this land came from? Because there is no administration. So who's going to pay for schooling in Jerusalem? And especially when we are talking about school in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, people used to come and live there. Students were like in board. Who's going to pay for the cost of that? So the Sultan will allocate, let's say, 1,000 dunams of olive trees to Al-Aqsa Mosque for the sake of the education. So the Aqsa will administer that road, that land, without being able to sell it. but they can rent it to others, they can do, you know, they're benefiting of it. Schools, hospitals, mosques, churches, they all have this kind of waqf land, you know, started to spread. Also, we can talk about private waqf land, that I have lots of land, and I decided that part of my land, I wanted to make it waqf for the sake of building, you know, a mosque in my village. So it happens. So these were the land code, and here the idea, the important idea, that from here now, we started to have accumulation of wealth locally, which meant that later on, also the Arab bourgeois started to emerge. The Ottomans, during that period, so they were so huge, they started having problems, especially in the north, with the Europeans, with the rise of nationalism and the ideas of national state, which started to grow more in Europe. So they started to lose parts because of, you know, either revolutions against the Ottomans or unrest periods, or, you know, lots of other reasons that people started to get away from the Ottoman Empire. You are lucky that you were not under the Ottomans at that time. Really. So, but by the First World War, the Ottomans lost most of their land, which, well, not their land, the empire, if you like, and they were reside only to what's known today as Turkey, but it's so bigger than the original Ottoman, you know, when they started as their country. And all these countries became now, again, without the Ottoman area. But it didn't happen like that, and it's so easy, because we are talking about the First World War. When the First World War, the British and the French, already they promised the Arabs at that time, if you make a revolution against the Ottomans and help us in this war, definitely we are going to give you a state, an Arab state. So the region of the Arab state is all this region, sorry, is all this region. It was never cut into countries and borders. From the very beginning of the first Islamic dynasty to the Ottomans, it was only one region. There is no countries. So the countries' ideas is very new. We're talking about after the First World War. The British and the French, they have an agreement called Sykes-Picot to cut the Arab world into these 22 countries which existed today. So the Arab bourgeois started to emerge also versus the Turkish bourgeois. That's very important, because the Turkish at that time, now we start calling Turkish instead of Ottomans, because we are talking about those who were the rich and the one creating the bourgeois. They lost many provinces because of this, as you saw, because of the, especially in Europe, because of these revolutions and the national feelings in Europe, expanding the habits, the expenditure, habits of the Sultan, because they have lots of money coming. There were, you know, all those images about Arabian Nights and the belly dancers and the, you know, the habli and all these kind of things, and, you know, it's the Turkish thing rather than even Arab. Borrowing from Europe, because the taxes were not enough and they are spending more. Borrowing from Europe means that you are inviting Europe to interfere, you know, that internally in your affairs, and also the influence of the taxation policies, that the taxation that was really very bad for the people, and people were always protesting, and the rise of the taxes all the time. That caused for the reform known as Tanzimat, which started in 1858 onward to, and the creation also of the Young Turks. Now, since we are talking about a bourgeois, a byproduct of any bourgeois usually is national thoughts. So nation state is related, and if you look at even the development of the nation states in Europe, it was also connected to the growth of the bourgeois and the, you know, emergence of the bourgeois. So Young Turks, as the part in Turkish, in the Ottoman Empire, were the bourgeois, or representing the bourgeois, during the last period of Sultan Abdul Hamid, from the mid 18th century till they have a revolution against him in 1908, and kicking him out and appointing another sultan who was not known for anything. He was just, like a puppet in their hands, not more than that. However, the Young Turks and their party called Union and Progress Party during a little bit before the First World War, they have this rising of Turkish nationalism, very, very strong and high, and they started to Turkification of the Ottoman Empire. That we have a vast empire, all of you will become Turks, but I'm not Turk. You have to learn the Turkish language, you have to use the Turkish language, and they were trying to Turkification of the Ottoman Empire, and that creates really a huge reaction, because you are talking about Kurds who are not Turks, you are talking about Arabs who are not Kurds, you are talking about all other nations who are under their control who are not Turks. So how come you are now trying to force us under this kind of and consequently they started also a massive campaign against all those having national ideas in the whole region. That was the last in Damascus wali in our area called Jamal Basha, and he was nicknamed the Butcher. Because he was so like horrible. People talk about him in the history talks that he was very brutal in fighting against and definitely the very famous Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who was leading this group, the Progress Union and Progress, and also part of the Young Turks, who were demanding more development on the account of the Ottoman Empire as an empire, or the Caliphate, or the Islamic dynasty. He was seeing things from secular perspective and from modernization rather than Islamic in general. But anyway, the Ottomans, they start persecuting Arabs everywhere because they have ideas about nationalism, or if they refuse to join in the army during the First World War, and their property were confiscated, they were also exiled. There are lots of atrocities made by the Ottomans during that period, which is a little bit before the First World War. Some of the Arab leaders who were hanged in Damascus in front of everyone, just to make sure that no one is going to talk about national feelings against the Turks. Also, we remember the Armenian genocide, because again the Armenians were saying, okay, we want our independence. And what independence? And they start, because they don't want anyone to get out of under their control. So all these kind of things had created among the Arabs at that time three political currents. One of them is the first one called the religious reformists. The second one, the decentralized, and the third one is the nationalists. Yet at the same time, the Arabs, they started to create what was known as the Arab al-Fatat, or the young Arabs versus young Turks. So the Arab bourgeois started to emerge at that period. And since also you are talking about Turkification, no, we are Arabs and we want our own independence. However, we look at these three currents. The first one is the religious reforms or reformers. Someone like Muhammad Rashid Rida or Muhammad Abdo and Jamal al-Din al-Afghani. Now those were very important at that time because they didn't talk at all about only the reform of the Ottoman Empire, but they were talking also about reforming Islam itself. Mm-hmm. And they said that Islam, these ideas, their ideas became really, really very, very important. I do teach Muhammad Abdo, for instance, today in our school, in our classes, and it's amazing, the difference between the understanding of Islam and Muhammad Abdo understanding, which is really very important. So they said that we need to reform the Ottoman Empire, and we need to reform also Islam. So they introduced their ideas, especially the Afghani, and Muhammad Abdo, he was his student, and later on Muhammad Rashid Rida, a student of Muhammad Abdo, three in a row. They all educated. Those two were in France, in Paris for a while, and they produced a newspaper. That was the beginning of the Arab Renaissance. But they took it from which perspective? From the religious perspective, that we need to reform Islam itself. And they came out with lots of ideas about the misinterpretation, because we have here a problem. What you see today in all of the Arab world and Islamic world, it's not supposed to be the same Islam that we should know, right? Because it's because of the interpretation. Because of the interpretation, or the Islamic discourse as we call it. So Islamic discourse depends on how you think and in what way you are pushing things, right? In the last 30 years we were subjected to the Wahhabis understanding of Islam that make everything, pushing us really, really down, and creating all these fanatic organizations such as Daesh and Al-Qaeda and all these kind of, stupid terrorist organizations, because of the thoughts and because of the discourse, how they interpreted Islam. Muhammad Abdu and Jamal al-Afghani, they said that we should go back in Islam to its origin understanding, and from there we should go on. Now, the biggest problem for Muslims in general, that at some stage, 900 years ago, the Abbasids, towards the end of the Abbasids era, they decided to stop ijtihad. Not jihad though, ijtihad. Ijtihad is the art of interpretation, the art of, creating the discourse. According to the Islamic faith, each and every Muslim have the right to interpret the Quran. And you shouldn't accept someone else tell you what to do in Islam, because our relationship as Muslims is supposed to be direct between you as a person and God, not through an authority, religious authority. So they said that we should abolish any religious authority, and your relation is direct, and we need to reopen the ijtihad thing. Now, not having ijtihad, it means that the Sharia laws, which was driven or came out from the Quran as source and from Hadith, Sunnah, from Muhammad, or by judgment of Muslims at that time, stopped. Because now you can't develop it. You can't develop it since there is no ijtihad. It means that it became separated after 900 years from reality. Reality today is going very fast, in a very modern way, capitalistic way, right? But at the same time, these laws are still behind 900 years ago. You can't, since there is no ijtihad, so you couldn't bridge the gap in the development of life, in all sorts, like economy and everything, and between what the law is talking about. I'll give you an example on that. For instance, in the Quran, it says that any thief, or if you quote a thief, his hand should be cut. Okay, now this is the verse, but there is no circumstances in the Quran. So the Sharia came to say, oh, wait a minute, yeah, this is the principle, but let's talk about it. If you leave your money unattended and someone stole it, it won't be considered a stealing. Because I can't cut his hand because it's your stupidity, you left your money. You need to have a breaking in to prove that this is a stealing. Ah, good, great. Right, so not every thief then we cut his hand. They said also, a thief won't consider a thief if he had part of the money that he stole. If I steal from my father, for instance, it won't be considered as a stealing. Because maybe my father is not, making a good life for my mother and brothers, so I have to. Right? Okay, so there are cases. This is the Sharia law, which is taken from one rigid verse in the Quran, right? So they interpret it in a way. Come to today. It means that if I have 7 shekels in the bank, right? Only 7 shekels in the bank, then I have part of the money. If I stole that bank, it would be considered a stealing. What about the electronic stealing? We have today the development of life, but the Sharia can't cover it. See what I mean? The dichotomy here, or the problem between what we have today of the development of the societies and what we have in the essence of the Sharia, if we want to. That's why we say, for all those who are trying to say, especially in the, coming to them, the political Islam groups, that we want to apply Sharia. You are stupid, you can't. Unless you open ijtihad door again as a science. If you can't open the ijtihad, then don't tell me about Islam is the solution and I'm going to rule in a, a Sharia law. No way, you can't. It's not, matter of, but people usually, they don't think about it and they say, yeah, we'll go back to Islam. Yes, let's apply Sharia. You can't apply Sharia. It's as easy as that. Now, Muhammad Abdu and Afghani and Muhammad Rashid Rida, they talked about that exactly, and they said we need to reopen Ijtihad and to develop all these kind of Sharia law. And they said, reopening Ijtihad, it will end also all feuds among Muslims themselves. There will be no Shia and Sunni. Let's sit together and have a new Sharia for all of us. So we are joining all the groups that they have differences in interpretation. The problem between Shia and Sunni is not the core issues. It's at some stage, the split was a political one. They split it. It was a political one over who's supposed to be the caliph, between Muawiyah and Ali. Okay, but after that, everyone grew on their own. So they developed their interpretation. These developed their interpretation. It became like a differences, but there's not real differences. All these differences are in the interpretation. If you have now Ijtihad again, you will get all these differences, so it will be easy. So this is the first current, which was they wanted the Ottoman Empire to continue because it's an Islamic state, and they are promoting the idea of an Islamic state, but they need to reform the state and to reform the religion, which is the most important point here. And the other current is the decentralized with Al-Kawakibi. Al-Kawakibi, he wrote a very good book about the tyranny characteristics, Qada' al-Istibdad. And it's a very valuable book because he's talking about, for the very first time during that period, end of the 18th century almost, about state separation of powers, the executive and the judiciary and the parliamentary, talking about how the state should be. He talked about a constitutional state, which is definitely against what the caliphs have in the Ottoman Empire. So he was talking about more or less a modern democratic country with constitution, separation of powers, elections, and taxes, arrangements, everything, which is, and he said we should get rid of the tyranny. People can't live with any rule that is, totalitarian and tyranny. And he said that the worst kind of ruling when the governor, and he's now referring with saying that to the Khalifa, the Caliph, that when the Caliph or the ruler have the three powers in his hand, not but those powers, no, new powers, political one, military one, and religious one. So he can take the decision, execute it by his military or by his forces, and cover it religiously. Like saying that what I'm doing is absolutely right, but by religion. So these are the worst. And he said that if we had those, it means that you are not going to live normally in your life as in a democracy or in a constitutional way. So we need to eliminate that. And he talked about lots of things. He ended up being killed by the, by the Ottomans at that time. They poisoned his coffee. So he had a cup of coffee and that's it. Though what we criticize in Kawakibi, that he wasn't daring enough to talk about revolution against tyranny. He said, I'm not that much with the revolution. I prefer to take it slowly and gradually to change. But we need to change. And if an ummah, a people, do not feel the pressure or the atrocities against them, they don't deserve to be free. So you have to feel that you are under pressure, and then we have to act accordingly. But he don't want us to act in a revolution. He tried to be a little bit mild, but even though that cost him his life. His idea about the Ottoman Empire, he also wanted the Islamic State to continue, but he said, let's go for decentralized government, like a federal system or a confederation. So the Arabs, they will have their independence, they have their language, they have their government. The Kurds, they will be independent, they have their, and so on. But we are all under the umbrella of the Ottoman Empire. That was the decentralized one. The third one, that early area, is the Arab nationalists. They said, we have nothing to do with the Ottomans any longer and the Islamic State any longer, and we want a total independence from them, or if you like some would put it, we want a divorce. That's it, with the Islamic caliphate and state. Now, the problem here, or not the problem, the difference here is between Muhammad Abdu, Afghani, and those, and even Kawakli, who wanted an Islamic State to continue, and between those is big difference over the issue of religion. While those they are talking about, the first one, they are talking about an Islamic State, it means that still the priority and the advantages is for the Muslims. It means what about the non-Muslims in this society? Or Christians and Jews who were living in the same Arab world at that time. They will be considered as second citizens, as second-class citizens in this case, because according to Islam, it's quite clear. You can't have a ruler who is non-Muslim over Muslims. So you have to choose only, and I always have this discussion with my students. What if, because we have Christian in Palestine, what if so and so, and would name some of the famous, Christian people who were struggling for Palestine, ran for the elections. In an Islamic State, you are not allowed to. And I said there is a huge difference here between, by law, he's allowed to, and you choose not to choose him, not to vote for him, it's up to you. But he had to have the right as an equal. That will contradict the idea of the first group. Now this group, they say, we want a national state based on Arabs, regardless of their religion. So any Arab would fit, not like any Muslim, regardless of his nationality. Here, no, it's the nationality, the Arabs, regardless of their religion. So all the religions will be equal as citizens, with regardless Muslim, Christian, or Jew. And at the same time, we have in here the state based on nationalism, not on religion. And Husari, the one who wrote his a very famous book about Arab nationalism, he stated that at least we have three elements of nationalism that is very important. Language, and he said that language is the put of thought. There is no thoughts without language. And the second one is the history, and he said the history is the story, if you like, or the collective memory of a people. So it's very important. And the last thing is this language is spoken and this history is happening on a piece of land. So you need the geography. These are three elements. Apart from that, religion or any other thing is not very relevant to the establishment of a national state. So that was the third one, which was his ideas were carried out practically. He kept it on the, let me say, the intellectual level, right? But practically by Abdel Nasser, Jamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. Abdel Nasser, he was thinking of Arab unity, and he promoted the idea of Arab unity, and he worked for it. And Arab nationalists, he formed the Arab Nationalist Party, which started to spread all over the Arab world. And at the same time, he thought even for solving the Palestinian question, it's the way to solve the Palestinian question is by the Arab unity. If the Arabs are united, then Israel have no chance in front of us, and then in this case we can liberate Palestine. That's his idea. And he tried to make the first step in an attempt to unifying Arab countries by having the unity between Egypt and Syria. In 1959 till 1962, it didn't work afterwards because I believe, and at some stage also Iraq joined. They call it the United Arab Republic. It didn't work because, again, the decisions were coming from the above, not from the down going up, like what happened, for instance, in the unity of the EU. You started with, at the beginning, to make all the laws regarding the taxes the same. They started from here. Then they start, okay, since the taxes are the same, then we can now open the borders for trade. You started economically, then you unify the education, you unify this, you unify that, till you reach the political level. Now, in the case of Abdel Nasser and Syria, they started from the political level by enforcing the unity, and they start going down to make the changes in the laws. And that was considered a big mistake, even by the Syrians, who thought at some stage, like, what's going on? Apparently, the Egyptians are occupying us. it's because they didn't feel it and feel the benefits of it. So it was a total failure. But however, Abdel Nasser, he was committed very much to the issue of Arab countries in general, and he fought a lot. He participated in the Yemen revolution, and he sent his army to Yemen in 1962. He also participated in the Algerian revolution, and he sent experts and money and weapons to the Algerian rebels against the French. He was also focusing a lot on Africa. He created at the same time the non-alignment movement at that time. He had a huge impact on the region, and Egypt became a major player in the whole region, that no one can do anything without, taking into consideration the position of Egypt. That's why he had to go, and that's the result of 1967 war. To defeat him, rather not defeating Abdel Nasser, but rather defeating the ideology of Arab nationalism. Don't even think about uniting Arabs, because uniting Arabs, it's. I'll give you one example. Instead of Arab unity, at some stage we have what was known as the Gulf Council, right? For 7 Arab countries, the Gulf states, they have the Gulf Council together, and they said that we are all alike, so no one is looking at the money of the others, because when Abdel Nasser was talking about unity, they say, you are interested in our money, you want to get our no. Okay, now you are the the rich club, the Gulf club, the oily club together. And they decided to have one currency. That was 25 years ago. Till today, they couldn't even agree to the name of the currency. Why? No, it's so easy. It's not because they are stupid and they can't name a currency. Well, let's call it a table by the end of the day. Right? No, but if you all have one currency, then you might say, we are selling our oil in our currency, not in the dollar. What will happen to the dollar? It will crash. It will crash. And the American economy will crash, because it depends not on the backing of gold, like all other countries. The backing of the dollar is the oil. So if they are united and have a currency, and they said, we are not using the dollar, the American dollar will crash. See, that's on a small level of only 7 countries. Can you imagine now 22? So absolutely we are not going to allow that to happen. So the ideas of Abdel Nasser were absolutely fought, and for that they used this, the political Islam. The party of Muslim Brotherhood was created in 1928.
When you say they used, who's the they?
In this case, the British, and later on the Americans.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question after that.
Okay, we'll have lots of discussions about that. No problem. No problem. Okay, the Muslim Brotherhood was created. The problem with the Muslim Brotherhood, if we are going to compare between them and Muhammad Abdu and Jamaluddin al-Afghani, their thoughts about also reforming Islam. Now, with the Muslim Brotherhood, they think about the whole issue of the starting point that we rule by Islam. And for that reason, they start having their own interpretation of Islam, including the idea of al-hakimiyya lillah, as they say. The only rule is for God, and it means that you cannot have or follow laws and rules made by humans, because that would be a kind of going against God. You have to use only the Sharia law. The establishment started at the hands of Hassan al-Banna, who was assassinated in 1949. Till now, nobody knows how he was assassinated. Some stories say that the British did it. Some people say that the king of Egypt, Farouk, at that time, he killed him. Others say no, it's because he denounced the militia group inside the Muslim Brotherhood who had committed many assassinations against prime minister, ministers, and judges at that time. So they were a little bit, and they put him in a position, since he was the head of the organization, in front of the British and the king, and he said, okay, I denounce all these kind of assassination problems, and we should solve the militia part of the party. the people on the militia, they didn't like it. So there is also a saying that they did the assassination for him. We don't know till yet till today. We need maybe Snowden to dig a little bit to find if they have someone have a reference. But this guy was the most important one, Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb came after Hassan al-Banna, and he took Hassan al-Banna's ideas and started developing them in his own way. His brilliant mind is very, accurate, and his language is so beautiful. For that I do respect him, but for his ideas, absolutely not, right? His ideas were based on how to turn Islam into a ruling power. And that contradicts totally Muhammad Abduh, who says there is no authority in Islam. Even the Sultan, from Muhammad Abduh's point of view, should rule by civil law, right? But he should know ijtihad and know Quran, so he will be fair. But he cannot impose the religion on people, because the relation is direct between the people and God. Now, in the case of Sayyid Qutb, he said, no. What parliament? This is stupid. Parliament means that you are taking, laws made by humans. If you follow these laws, like, you are not following God, you are following people. So you are worshipping people instead of worshipping God. So we should abolish all laws. He's a little bit Platonian in his ideas in the Islamic society. And he makes 3 societies in his mind. The first one is the Western society, and he considered it as inhumane society and animalic society. That's how he called it, yes, the Western societies. Animalic and inhumane. Animalic, in his books, he said that because they have an open sexual relationships. So they are like animals. It won't suit our societies. The second one, why not unhumane? Because they are following materialism, whether in case of buying things and wanting things, or materialism as the dialectic materialism, the Marxist materialism, that they believe in not believing in God and believing in materialism. That's the first society. The second society, he called them the Jahili society. And Jahili society, the ignorance, if you want to translate today in an Arab language of today, which is almost his, like making us as infidels. And he's talking about all Arab countries. Why? Because we are not following God's Sharia, and we are following, laws made by humans. And he wanted the Islamic society, that the perfect one, that everything is going really smooth, and so anyway, he was so tough in his ideas. Muslim Brotherhood later on, during the 80s, they denounced his ideas. They said, no, he's not representing us. Though before that, he was absolutely representing them. And now, who's following his ideas is mostly the more radical Islamic groups, like Daesh. Yeah. For instance, he would say that, one of the examples of Sayyid Qutb, that there is no such a thing as a human culture or a human civilization if it is not related to Islam. So anything before Islam is, from his point of view, not considered as civilization or even culture. That's why the calls to, in Iraq, what happened when the Daesh came, they started, to damage all the statues and the museum. The calls in Egypt to break down even the pyramids. This is, because he's saying that, no, all that before is absolutely not Islamic. Even the humanistic, if you like, thoughts and ideas and culture is after Islam. So it's like denying, and I usually ask my students, what this scene looks like to you? And they will go all, Mona Lisa, yes, how do you know that? How do you know that? Then you will tell me there is no a human culture? There is a human culture. What about denouncing slavery? What about human rights? So we have something called today human culture, right? Now, Sayyid Qutb, he denies that totally, and he said this is all rubbish, and if it is not related to Islam or coming from Islamic source, it is not there. he was assassinated, or not assassinated, he was hanged in 1966, accused by the Abdel Nasser regime at that time of being part of a plot to assassinate Abdel Nasser, and he was assassinated in 1966. He wrote 4 or 5 books anyway, but they are still, very relative till today, because lots of Muslim Brotherhood, though officially they denounce his ideas, but sentimentally, apparently, they are still in connection with him. And always I have problem when I'm teaching him, especially when we go to the details with the students. They a little bit, especially we are talking about a conservative society, and yeah, it is problematic, especially when you go to lots of details. For instance, his position on women, or family, or work, and all these kind of things. When you go to the details, you'll find to what extent he's rigid in his ideas. For instance, he said that the role of women in life is to raise children, which is, again, it's contradicting even the Quran. Because the Quran is saying that women can work, and if they work also, the money that they earn from their work, it's up to them to share it with their husbands and their family or not. It's their money and it belongs to them. So work during that period then was allowed, and Muhammad himself, he was married to a merchant, the first marriage. And he used to work for her, Khadija. Exactly. She was a merchant, so women used to work. So now Qutb is saying of today, so this is the problem, the interpretation. Which the Quran on one side, the interpretation is going totally different, in a different direction. So these are the ideas, at least for the nationalists and the Islamist political parties. Then we come to some ideas which started to come around nowadays about secularism in the Arab world. Someone like Adel Zahir is arguing that unless we have secularism and to separate religion from this society, it will be really, really difficult to build societies which is normal, modern, and we can get to the next level in our life for democracy and for the well-being of the Arab region. Also, not only him, but on the Marxist level, we have many writers. Some of them were assassinated by also fanatics, like Hussein Mawwa, he was assassinated. We have Muhammad Arkoun, and we have Muhammad Abdel Jabiri, and they say we have to look at a new interpretation, not only to the Quran, but also to the heritage, Islamic heritage, and how to look and study the societies, Arab societies, because here we have an irony that between Orientalists and Islamists, they are absolutely having the same idea. Orientalists, they saw our societies only from one perspective, Islam. And whenever they are talking about Arab region, immediately the first thing they jump to their minds usually is Islam, and try to interpret everything through Islam. These ideas, at some stage, when I was doing my master's degree in UK, there was a professor coming from United States University, one of the universities, I don't remember his name now, and he gave a lecture about democracy in the Arab world. And he says, I don't know, is it something in their culture or something in their religion that prevent Arabs of developing? And I felt that that was a huge insult to me. Not culture and not the religion, there must be some other reasons, right? So I start digging over that to come with my own ideas about why we couldn't develop this kind of things. I'm coming to that anyway. But we have those also Marxists who are trying to interpret the studying of the history of the region from its right perspective, which is a social, economical reasons of studying any society, rather than try to interpret it only by religion or by culture. So this is the good point of them. However, all those writers and thoughts and the different thoughts that we have or come across today, none of them found this kind of vessel to carry it, apart from Abdel Nasser. He tried and he failed. And the reason for it, that creating this kind of alienation today in the Arab world between the real life, daily life, which is very much capitalistic life in every sense, right? and between the upper structure of the society, thoughts, religion, culture, and everything, which is still haunted by the feudal time. This is the major problem in our Arab world. So if you want to understand what's going on, the society is very capitalistic, modern, because economy and companies and they are really pressurizing that, but at the same time the set of thoughts in the society are still traditional. Usually I tell my students like that. The fathers in the villages are totally convinced that they should send their daughters to the university, because now a girl without education works not, and because she needs also to work. So he's convinced totally that she needs to go to university. But at the same time, he tells her, okay, go to university, but don't talk to boys. See the contradiction? The pressure of their life, he forced him to send the daughter to the, but don't talk to the boys. How come? She's in a university, which is an open society, definitely. But the mentality, just to give you the example of that. What happened? In the emergence of the Arab bourgeois, if we are comparing with Europe, the classical example, when the bourgeois growing, they have to go, there is a contradiction in their ideas and the development with the old system, the church and the monarchies. So the feudal, at some stage they have to go against each other to win. And in this case, they not only change the infrastructure of the society, which is the economy, but also the upper structure with it. Now, in our case, what happened? The emergence bourgeois started, and they wanted to go against the Ottoman as the feudal representation of the feudal system. While we are in the beginning of this process, it was interrupted by the colonial power and the occupation of all the Arab countries, the British and the French. So now, instead for these two forces fighting each other, they have to go into alliance against the colonial power. When we have the state produced after that, after the end of the colonial time, the Arabs were doing a modern country, but the constitution drawn from the Quran. See? They couldn't now solve the problem on the upper level at all, so we continue to have. That's why the phenomena, for instance, we never ever look at a leader in the Arab world as an employee. He's coming for 4 years or 8 years and he will go. No, he should be the father figure. And that's why he continued for 20 years and 30 years and we start dealing with him like that, as a father figure, because we are still in the patriarchal mentality that we couldn't get out of it. So you are talking about a society who's run by the capitalism, yet you have the patriarchal society at the same time in the level of mentality. And that would create a huge problem in any country at all. That's why Abdul Zahir in the secularism, he said we have to go and finish that issue. Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid, for instance, he had a book called The Criticism of the Islamic Discourse. And he talked about the Islamic discourse, that there is lots of mistakes, and what you are doing, that you are mixing religion with everything, right? Which is not true. And they came out today with some interpretation which is unbelievable, try to prove that what Quran contain is explaining today, discoveries in science, try to find the. This is stupid. This is absolutely stupid. We are still going in the same circle. We can't break that circle, which is the religion and the heritage of our societies. And this is a big problem, because you can't go advancing and create something new without, for instance, I'll give you an example. No way that any issue come in front of you, the first thing in the Arab world, they will think haram or halal. Is it forbidden by God or it's allowed by God? Come on, for God's sake, sometimes it has nothing to do with anything, but always this question is coming there. One of my students, when we were discussing this subject, one of my students, she said, well, I know, you are right. Because the other day, we had a lecturer coming from outside, another visitor lecturer, in biology department. And she was talking about that now science discovered the agents that can work with the human cells to make it, longer, not to get into old. So we might witness in the next future, very, close future, people who can live till 200 years. And she said, the first thing struck me is that halal or haram. This is pure science. Why you apply halal or haram, right? The lady didn't say we are going to, make the dead alive again, or no one will die ever. No, she said that way. So this is haunting everything. It's haunting everything. And when you put a question in front of the students, the problem is that the Sharia don't have an answer today because it was, not developed. And at the same time, what they have today is this huge feeling, miserable feeling that they are committing something wrong, but they don't have the real answer. For instance, I ask my students, especially girls, right? What do you think of the Facebook? Is it halal or haram? And they got really confused because they have this guilt. Right? She's talking to boys on the net. She's talking to boys on Facebook. Is that halal or haram? Come on, see what I mean? We are still haunted by the patriarchal mentality, while at the same time we are facing the real pressure of a society which is today is a totally capitalistic one. So unless we solve this problem, I don't think that the Arab world, 22 Arab countries, be united or even develop or to produce anything. Now, to top it all, in the last 30 years, we were under this organized campaign by the Americans, the Israelis, and the Saudis, right, to produce a huge and mass production of Wahhabism and Wahhabi thoughts of interpretation of the way of life and Quran into this society, turning, and also it was together with neoliberal economy that was coming very strongly into the area, turning the whole Arab world from producing countries into a consumer countries, totally consumer countries. What the Arab do produce today? Nothing. And if we have some examples like, Iraq at some stage or Syria today, we have to destroy those countries. Because Syria, for instance, is not joining the liberal economy, and they have more of their own products. They don't buy from outside because they can, do that. No. They don't have debts to the World Bank. This is bad. So we have to destroy it. So for all these reasons, we say that we have lots of Arab thoughts, Arab intellectuals who are still writing. Some of them are being assassinated at some stage here and there. Till, even recently, we're talking about Shukr al-Eid in Tunisia. He was assassinated like 2 years ago. So always you have these thinkers or those who are bringing these kind of ideas are subject to a huge criticism because still the core of the society believe in this heritage in their own way, in their different interpretations, and they are not accepting new ideas or to criticize the heritage. As we say usually, Japan went out after they sit down and they have to review their own culture. They review the culture, they kick out some of it, they kept some of it, and some of it they modify it. Then Japan went up, especially after the Second World War. In our case, we are still going around our culture, our heritage, and we can't even touch it. We don't dare even to criticize it. That's why I start usually with my students with the first thing I say there's 3 levels. The first one is religion itself, put it aside, I'm not going to touch it. We have the religious discourse, and we have the history. And those, I'm going really to, make hell out of those. Because this is interpretation by people, no problem, and history. You are understanding history in a very bad way. In our schools, how they teach history, right? We end with the Umayyads dynasty, then the Abbasi dynasty came. How? Do you think that the Umayyads say, oh, we are now so tired, please Abbasi come and take it from us? No, wars. They kill each other. Why you didn't talk about that? So don't give me this impression that my heritage is pure and nice and great. No, there was flaws. There was revolutions. There was people against the government, against even Islamic government. Can you imagine that someone stand against the caliph? Oh, yes, there was. But you don't see it in history because they want to see, only the beautiful picture. And always they say, go back to Islam, to the golden times. What golden times? There is no golden times. In each golden time, you have also flaws. You have problems. Always. You don't understand society in this way, golden times. Or nostalgia about, time. And that's why they're still calling, go back to Islam, try Islam again. We tried it once and it was successful. Let's try it again. The circumstances are changing. You can't use it again. You don't have today the ideas of those days when they have more open-minded. Why they closed the ijtihad during the Abbasids? Because of flourishing of science and thoughts, especially in philosophy. And philosophers started to go even beyond the official interpretation. The caliphs didn't like it. For instance, Averroes, very famous Arab philosopher, he said, well, God is just. And if God is just, then the caliph is representing God on earth, should be just. And if our caliph is not just, we have the right to go against him. So the caliph said, okay, bring him and all his books. And he burned all his works. It's unbelievable. See, then they decided to stop the art of interpretation, the ijtihad. Because they don't want the new ideas to come, will put pressure more on the caliph. So the caliph now can be free hand in ruling. And that had affected us in these last 900 years, and especially in the last period of the Ottomans, when we became really under a very, very, very bad situation, and they put us down. So this is at least an idea about the Arab society, the thoughts, and the perspective for the future. Thank you.
So that was excellent, very, very, very interesting indeed. I'm sure there are those among us who would like to ask some questions or perhaps
Yes,
make
please.
some comments or...
Yeah, I'm promised with one here. I'm promised with a question.
I was typing your notes, not, doing
Okay.
that. I'm very visual, so no disrespect, man. And I have highlights and everything. So,
Can I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate this because it throws light on many questions which I suppose I can call myself we as Westerners ask, and you put your finger on some of these questions very nicely. I am also struck by some parallels between, shall we say, the Islamic tradition and the Christian tradition, because for instance, when you mention the halting of ijtihad, for me this brings to mind the development which occurred in the Christian tradition, which we call moral theology, which is active to this day.
Exactly.
People are at the moment, for instance, talking about in vitro fertilization, and people try to appeal to Christian thought, but it is something developing. So in a sense, it is a pity, that, as you say, that this process was stopped.
Yes.
Another thing which has struck me, not only from today, but thinking about it, is in our tradition, especially at the end of the 19th century, we allowed some kind of liberal approach to the idea of inspiration. So you of course in the Quran say that it was dictated by the angel, even in Arabic. We had ideas very close to that. People could still today you find people thinking that the world was created in 7 days, for instance. But the modernist approach allowed a rethinking of our understanding of the Bible and of religion. And it is an ongoing process, and that allows, of course, dialogue even with people who are not believers, who are scientists. So even though a Christian today can still believe in divine inspiration of the Bible, still, for instance, we talk of the role of the human author of the books of the Bible,
Yes.
for instance. It is a pity that there isn't, this kind of possibility in Islam, which results in the hardening
Yes.
of positions.
Yeah. Look, yes, you are right, absolutely. There are many differences, but these differences which came into Europe, it came because there was, lots of pressures done by the society to make the change, right? The need, the necessities. I'll give you an example on that, and then I'll comment on the rest of the... in Saudi Arabia, at some stage, there was no banks at all. Because banks is supposed to, dealing with interest, and interest is haram. So, no banks, right? In the 80s, they witnessed exactly 1973 and 79, and after they witnessed what they call it the oil boom. 73 when they boycott the oil and they stopped selling it, and Europe and America went into really a crisis of no oil, and that brought the prices really high up for the very first time. Then 79 when the Iranian revolution happened and Iran as a producer out of the picture, so the oil also had another rise up in the prices. These two oil booms created in Saudi Arabia lots of educated people who now became rich, educated because of the money, and they start thinking, okay, can we do something new, different? So they went into industrialization, especially in the products related to oil, like rubber and asphalt and all these kind of things. And they have an advantage, many advantages. First of all, the material are so cheap because it's the same country. The production is very cheap. Saudi Arabia, they don't have taxes at all, any kind of taxes, no taxes at all. So it means that they have a huge advantage versus the other companies. So that makes a huge, profits for them. But now, if I'm selling to Europe and coming back and getting my money, there is no bank in Saudi Arabia. How am I going to get my money? And they fed up, carrying this huge bag with millions. So they start pressurizing the government, saying, okay, we need banks, and that's haram. No, we need banks. And they start pressurizing them in a way, because you are talking about here about a class with economic interest and strength. They start pushing for their new liberal laws. Now we need banks. So they came around it anyway, as usual, and they say, okay, we'll allow banks, but we'll call it Islamic banks, which is, like, this is my ear. It's only playing on the words, right? So they solved the problem. The same was also with insurance companies, because according to Islam, you can't accept insurance because only God insures you. Who's that company saying that will insure what? Come on, only God insures your life. So they refused the insurance. Still, they also pressurized them, and they say, okay, in each policy of the insurance, in each document we start with after God. We insure your money, we insure your life, we insure your car, whatever. See, it's also, again, playing with the words. I'm showing here that a social class group, for their own interests, started to pressurize the government in a way that they have to change laws. That's how it works, usually, right? The problem is that, can we apply the same group, for instance, to say giving the women right to drive? No. Because it's not part of their interest. It's not part of their interest. So changes in the society depends also on this interest of groups. Now, in the case of Europe, as you mentioned, it's absolutely, we are talking about an emerging bourgeois, and you are talking about, a big economy, you are talking about, a capitalist economy, which needs more than just the interpretation that are there, and hence there was development even in the thoughts and the methodologies, and even in the church there was lots of development. Now the church is trying to follow the running of the society, not the other way around. Now if we try to apply that in our case, it's totally different, because even the groups that who have the power to pressurize, they are not doing the pressure in the right direction. Right? So they are trying to think of it only politically, but not with the thought framework, which is in this case the heritage, all the heritage of Islam. And that's make it very difficult sometimes to make the change. Though we need a new reading of our heritage and new evaluation of the heritage and the ability to criticize this heritage in order to get somewhere out of the situation. We can't develop not just because of the stopping the ijtihad. No, but at least if you can't do new ijtihad, stop working with all these interpretations instead, which is absolutely very bad interpretations. Everyone can do his own, interpretation and his own kind of discourse in Islam based on the Quran. But now they are trying to put more on the Quran as if it has all the answers. Though I'm always using this example with my students just to shock them about facts. Muhammad said in one of his verses that to the people, you are knowing much better than me in your daily life. And I asked him, do you know why this happened? The story behind it was, he was sitting there and they came to him and they said, we have the palm trees. You have usually a female and male palm trees, and usually they do the
fertilizing.
Yes. And they asked him, shall we do the fertilizing or it will be done on its own? He said, don't do it, don't bother. So the next season, after a year, the whole thing was ruined. So they came and said, what did you say? They said, you ruined everything for us. And he said, you know much better than me. Now, the first thing to learn, if you ask Muhammad as a religious man, a prophet, he will answer you. If you ask him as a agricultural engineer, he's not. He's not, right? And the second important thing I usually ask my students, do you think God couldn't fix that immediately on the spot? And send someone to Muhammad said, don't answer. This is a trick. Or, give him the right answer. Do God was intentionally wanted Muhammad to make this mistake? Apparently yes, otherwise he could prevent it. So we learned the lesson. And now you are dealing exactly in the same way. The Quran is a religious book for your relation with God. It is not chemistry book, it's not physics book, it's not, this kind economy. Yes, so this is the problem that they want to apply it on everything. It won't work.
So,
it won't work.
Can I ask you, so when you discuss these things with your students, I mean, young people are important because they're the ones, hopefully, who will potentially bring change.
Yes.
And you know what happened also in Egypt with young people or the young people. So, how do they react? What's your feeling with your students?
Yes.
Do you think there's promise there of
of
possible change?
Usually I would say that if I can get 10 out of the 40 students who just clicked in their mind to make the change or to think about it or to start reading or start digging, I'll be successful in that class. Usually at the very beginning I told them my role in this class is to absolutely provoke you. I'm here just to intimidate you. And I'll bring in all these kinds of questions, which legal, because I told you in the first thing, I'm not going to touch the religion itself. I'm talking about the discourse and the history. So I put them in front of lots of challenges of a stereotype that they know, but they never thought about it. So when you shock their mind in that, they start thinking. At the beginning, they would refuse me and reject me. No, okay, maybe I'm a mistake, you think? Yes, you are a mistake. Bring me the proof. They couldn't, right? Then they start listening to me and they said, what I'm saying is quite right, sound right, but they are not comfortable with it. That's the second time, huh? They feeling like, I'm touching on a very sensitive issues. Then they start to realize that this is a new way of thinking and no, it's different. The funny story is, in my coming this visit to Malta, in the airport, I picked the taxi come take me from the hotel to the airport in Amman, Jordan, and the taxi driver called me and said, well, we have another Palestinian who wanted to go to the airport, so do you mind? Because I booked the taxi. I said, it's okay, he can go. So the guy, the moment he saw me, he said, do you remember me? First time for me. I said, no. He said, I was one of your students. He said, well, look, now I'm 5 years graduated, I'm working in the Arab Bank and my position is quite good. I don't remember of my studying at Birzeit more than your classes, because you made me think differently. I'm so happy. That's what I wanted, to hear. So yes, slowly, but it's getting somewhere, very slowly. But we are trying.
There is a stereotype, at least in the West, about Islam as being essentially a theocracy. Do you think that this factor is still important in inhibiting the progression to democracies in Arab societies?
Yeah. Yes, I think Islam have nothing to do with it. You know, Islam is absolutely innocent of all these accusations as Islam. But Muslims, yes, they are. Like when you are talking about Iran, what is Iran? It's a theocracy, right? When you are talking about Saudi Arabia, what is Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia is a religious, not theocracy, a religious regime, depending on imams and sheikhs and religious groups to support them, right? Not like in Iran, the same guy who's taking the decision, So yeah, this is the practice of the Muslims rather than the Islam itself. If I can understand Islam, it's really by reading the Quran, and I've done that many times, in a studying way, not just in reading the Quran or reciting. No, it didn't mention anything. To the contrary, more the indications of the Quran, if I'm going to follow it, is saying it's a kind of a secular. Your relationship with God is individual, so there is no collectiveness here. So who am I to tell you whatever, right? If you're so this is the relationship with God is individual thing. So the rest of the society had to arrange their own life, the way it suits them, the way it suits them. We are talking about Muhammad, for instance. He said about shura, that shura is something like parliament, right? But the interpretation later came, okay, you can make shura, parliament, but you are not, as a caliph, you are not necessarily follow. These were interpretations, have nothing to do with the real. So there is a huge difference between Islam itself and the practice of Muslims, right? Because of that, whenever now in the West say Muslims, right, immediately the first image would come terrorism, right? Okay, what if I tell you, keep that opinion, Malaysia, a Muslim in Malaysia, is he a terrorist also? Or a Muslim in Indonesia? No, they are not. They are more peaceful. So what is it then? Is it the Islam, Muslims, or the region, the Arab world particularly, is the one accused of terrorism? See? This is the perspective of today. It's totally confusing because we have lots of interferences coming from outside for their own reasons, which have make the scenery more complicated. It's not an easy task to fight against these thoughts while you have someone like from Bush till today talking about Islam, and we are fighting Islamophobia, phobia. And I said it many times. I'm never believed generally. I'm not practicing Muslim, but they put me in a position to defend Islam because they are doing that, in purpose against me, against me as an Arab, against me as a thought or whatever. And they want to make us all to, stereotype us in a way that you are all terrorists, you are all in this way. And that won't help at all the idea of, breaking, because that will make more Muslims come together again and be more even violent, and, because everyone is having a block against us, so we have to unite against those and so on. So it's really, really very bad situation.
So, given this scenario, shall we say, what led to the hopes which were born with the Arab Spring in different countries?
Yeah, this is a very good question. The Arab Spring, anyway, from some perspective, they will say it's a failure. Failure to produce results, that's for sure. For me, it was not a failure. For me, it was, for the very first time, in a long period of time, Arabs stand up and say no to the governor, breaking the stereotype. At least I can see the opportunity only in here, in this now. The results, yes, because usually when someone asks me about the Arab revolutions, the Arab Spring, I would say it's 1.5 out of 6. That's all. 1, because it went out of their hands very quickly in Tunisia. In 3 weeks, everything was finished, right? Egypt, they started for 3 weeks, they get Mubarak out, then the Americans interfered immediately. And then the rest, in Syria, Come on, there is no one around the world didn't interfere in what's going on in Syria. In Yemen, look what's going on in Yemen. And in Libya, look what happened, after Gaddafi and killing of Gaddafi. Why the West, in this case, they were very much interested in coming against Gaddafi. And in Bahrain, they also just, crushed by the 100,000 soldiers from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
They marched there and they crushed everything. So, by results, no, this is a big problem, but at least people, for the very first time, they dared to stand against their oppressor. And this is, I would say, a good sign. Maybe we need another 20 years, 15 years, you never know, but people at least learn somehow.
But these were popular movements, They were bottom up.
Yes, absolutely, and spontaneous,
Yeah.
and spontaneous. Unless we are talking about very small cases where from the very beginning they tried to interfere, especially the case of Syria. Because the difference is that in Egypt and in Tunisia, usually we categorize them together. If you are talking about a circle, you are talking about the whole people versus small part of the society, which is the top level, right? But when you are talking about Yemen and Syria, it's a vertical. You have people with the regime, you have people against the regime. So it's vertical. It's more likely to be a civil war in both countries, because in the case of Syria, it's because of Ba'ath party there, and everyone is Ba'ath in a way or another if you want to be a high-ranked. And not just that, they saw the experience of what happened in Iraq when everything was crushed because of the Ba'ath. So people in Ba'ath, they wanted to defend themselves, not to defend the regime. They want to defend themselves, in this case, to keep whatever they have. In Yemen, it's a different story because it's based on tribalism, the split in the society in tribalism. So these are the differences. Now Yemen and Syria on the one hand, and Egypt and Tunisia on the other. Now here we have the whole people against the upper strata and the society, the elite, and here you have people versus people at the same time. But regardless, the whole idea is that people dared to stand against their rulers for the very first time and to say no.
I have to go. Sorry,
Yes.
but it was very interesting. Thank you very much. But I have a lecture, so I have to go.
We have 1 minute for
Yeah.
John Portelli to
No,
ask a
I will
question.
talk to him afterwards if you have time, because I know. But regarding the spontaneous, I mean that is very debatable, to say the least, because it depends on what kind of philosophy of history you take. From an Ibn Khaldun perspective, it was a result of a build-up, correct?
Yes,
Which is,
absolutely.
and spontaneous, I had colleagues in Tunisia who I had met 2 years before. They were militating to bring this forth through the internet, which is very difficult to show, but it was happening
Yes.
in a different way.
That was
So
one-
whether it is,
Spontaneous or
but
not.
out of the many questions, I will ask this one, or it's a comment, okay? Ijtihad promotes in Islam an element of individualism on an element of spirituality, right? Yet Islam, based on peace and social justice, which it also is, and I don't see these as a contradiction, but a positive tension, okay? Emphasizing the collective, the Jama'ah, all right, is another story. So, it's not an either or, as maybe one may get the impression from some of your interpretations. Now, the point is, it gets me back to the possible influence on the Ottoman political thinking from Plato, Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd, and so on, which emphasized the Jama'ah without forgetting the individual, right? With the difference in the Ottoman political structure that the masses are not provided for by the state, while in the Platonic, Al-Farabi and Averroes and so on, the masses are provided for by the state. So this may be another possible downfall of the. Now, of course, what the Ottomans did in some sense is a form of capitalism. They're introducing property in a capitalistic sense, all right? Added on to Al-Farabi and Plato, that creates a hodgepodge of things. It creates also a form of colonialism, let's face it. So my question was, in this sense, you say that the Ottoman Empire was backwards. Given colonial thinking and liberal thinking in the West, capitalist thinking in the West, this was forward. Okay, now, of course, for me, it depends what counts as forward and backward. For me, capitalism and colonialism, which go hand in hand, is not forward, but backwards.
Yes.
So in some sense, one could argue the Ottoman political system, not following Plato, with all its Plato's faults, was really backwards. Not in your sense of backwards, but in another sense of backwards. Now, of course, Ijtihad is very progressive, unlike the centralized Catholic religious hierarchy. And Professor Borch has, I think, said. But let us remember one example. Aquinas in Paris was constantly quoting Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and he was threatened to be fired if he continues to quoting Ibn Sina. All right, so this tension that you talk about in Islam, I think is very much, has a very long history even in Catholicism. And I don't think it is resolved. It's not resolved because of the tension between conscience and the dogma.
An embargo. There isn't
Huh?
an embargo. My point was, there isn't, I mean, you know, it's actually a discipline. Moral theology at university, we have specialists who describe themselves as moral theologians.
Yes, but in the
It is
first
something unknown.
university in Fez is based on Islamic moral theology as well, and we forget that in the West. And we say Bologna was the first. Bullshit. Bologna was not the first.
Yes,
Fez
right.
was the first. And I say this as a Catholic, not as a, I'm not Muslim. So, but still, you know, this is a very complicated.
Yes.
So that was one topic I was thinking about. I know it's big. It's a book.
It is,
Sorry.
yes,
Sorry.
it is. Thank you. But you raise very, very good questions. I don't think that I'm going to answer to all these approaches, but the problem is to make the distinction between the Islamic philosophy of the period of Farabi, Rushd and Abasin and all this period, or they introduced for the very first time the rationalism and the logic and the thinking. You know that quite well. To what extent that has influenced us today? Zero.
I understand, but this is why you call, sorry to interrupt you, you make reference to the importance of going back to the heritage. This is part of the heritage.
Yes.
When I go to give talks in the Gulf, I ask them about Al-Farabi, Berlouche, Ibn Sina. No one knows anything.
At all.
All they want to do is adore British philosophers and British economists. That's all they want to do, which is the disaster of the Arab states. Sorry, it's just, I get very passionate.
You're absolutely right, because I'm always making the point that I don't want to change our situation to be like the West.
Yes.
I don't think that the West, even on the democracy and other issues that they are talking about, is even absolutely right.
But they don't want that.
No, at all. I say, okay, there is a huge difference between democracy and justice.
Yes.
Because by the end of the day, okay, in America, anyone basically can run for presidency, but who would win?
Exactly.
Who would win? So it's a democracy for whom?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, I know
It's not a democracy.
Yes, it's not a democracy.
And John
exactly.
Dewey had said that as well. And John Dewey in the 1920s was in Turkey.
Yeah.
And I don't know that part, but you may. What influence may have there been on Dewey's notion of democracy and Ataturk and so on? But that's
Look, also Ataturk, he put it, in a very, very bad way, because he was, going in a... Anyway, the whole idea is that, again, I'm saying that we do need to look back at our heritage, right? To have the ability to criticize it and to change a few things. Few things might we throw it away, things we need to develop, and others we need to keep.
sure.
That's a perfect ending.
It's not perfect. And it's Nasser also, but we can talk about Nasser. Because Nasser was a socialist. And Syria and Iraq were influenced by the Americans and British, which are very liberal and individualist. So of course, it's not Nasser's fault that it didn't work. It's the fault of the Americans and the British, but that's another story. Okay.
In every sense against Abdel Nasser.
All right.
No.
And I don't want to be romantic about Nasser, but I like him. So.
Yeah, I do. I do like him, not much, but at the same time, that won't prevent, to
Yes.
sit whatever we think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was excellent. Very, very interesting indeed.
Thank you, guys.
Very stimulating.